Marty, good morning. Former President Trump did say recently he plans to make a big announcement next week, but that announcement really could come any day now. There is much speculation that the president will announce that he's going to run for president again, although after Tuesday night's slate of losses there within the Republican Party, some are beginning to wonder within his own party if Trump's best days are actually behind him. The former president endorsed some 300 candidates all across the country for the midterm elections. He made appearances with some candidates and dumped millions of dollars into some campaigns, many of those campaigns in battleground states, by the way. Perhaps the biggest loss for Mr. Trump happened in Pennsylvania, where Dr. Mehmet Oz lost his race for the Senate. Oz had Trump's support. In fact, the two men made a campaign appearance together just before the election, but still it was not enough to get Oz into the winner's circle. But Trump also had some notable victories, including J.D. Vance, who won his Senate race in Ohio. Trump wanted a so-called red wave, urging his followers to vote Republican up and down the ballot, but that did not happen. Mr. Trump also widely seen as a political kingmaker because of his enormous popularity in the Republican Party. But with several Trump-backed candidates recently losing, does he still have the Midas touch? And will the Republican Party be looking for a new leader? Well, some have suggested that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis may be the future of the party after his significant double-digit win in his re-election bid for governor in Florida. But Donald Trump maintains a very prominent position in the Republican Party, and he will not be pushed aside without pushing back. In fact, he had this to say on his Truth Social platform: "For those many people that are being fed the fake narrative from the corrupt media that I am angry about the midterms, don't believe it. I am not angry at all. Did a great job. I wasn't the one running. And I'm very busy looking into the future. Remember," he says, "I am a stable genius." Meanwhile, former Vice President Mike Pence actually wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal where he talks about how his former boss, Mr. Trump, tried pressuring him into not confirming or certifying the 2020 election results. Mr. Pence says he said to Trump he didn't believe he had the power to determine which votes should count and which votes should not count, and he made that statement to members of Congress. Well, Mr. Pence claims that Donald Trump said to him, "You'll go down as a wimp if you do that," and that I made a big mistake 5 years ago. He's referring to when he chose to have Mike Pence as his running mate. We should also mention that next week, Mike Pence does have a new book coming out. But as for that big announcement, Marty, members of the party are saying, no, don't make any kind of announcement until that runoff between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker is completed in the next month or so. But as you know, Donald Trump is his own man, and he does what he wants to do when he wants to do it. So we'll have to see how he handles this big announcement. Marni?
Right, his mind seems set on next Tuesday, Dre. We saw the former president vote in Florida. He lives in Florida part of the time. He has taken, though, some pretty serious jabs at DeSantis over the last couple of days after his big win in the gubernatorial race. Do we know how Trump cast his vote in the governor's race? Has he shared that? Did he vote for DeSantis?
Well, at a brief news conference after he left the voting booth there in Florida, he did say he cast a vote for Ron DeSantis. But here is where the dilemma comes into play. The former president says that during his first run for governor, Ron DeSantis, that DeSantis came to Donald Trump on bended knee because his campaign was in trouble or almost dead. Donald Trump says that he revived the DeSantis campaign, and that because of that, Ron DeSantis owes him a debt of gratitude or loyalty. And Mr. Trump feels as if the best way to do that is for Ron DeSantis not to run for president in 2024. That is the dilemma. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis has not responded to anything the former president has said about him. He's rather focusing on, taking up the business of Florida. Marni?
Well, we know it's going to be interesting. Dre Clark, thank you this morning. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.